From last year, around August, to the time of the incident, February maybe, I was really into LSD. I had a very reliable supplier. It was always the real stuff. Never bought a hit or two at a time. I would usually get a strip or two. Of course, not all for me. For the entire time period, I dropped maybe once every 2 weeks. I'd do anywhere from 3 to 5, greatly enjoying it. Nothing bad ever happened. One night after work, I went to X's house. I'd gotten the strip of some good microdot. I was a little worn out, so I didn't want to do the normal amount. Keep in mind, I've dropped at least a few hundred times. So I decided to do 2, just to chill out and have fun and experience the experience, you know? So, I dropped 2 and he dropped 3 around 11 or so, the normal time I drop. I'm a night tripper, and I've never been a fan of day tripping because every time I trip in public, I feel like everyone's laughing at me for some reason. About an hour in, it started. Everything was going as it usually does with LSD, slow melting movements, laughing hysterically, the normal. We decided to watch some Dragon Ball Z for a few hours, smoke some bud, do the normal. But then things got dark, fast. I disconnected from the TV show and just started exploring my mind. Then something happened. I'll never be able to explain this. Please, from here on out, keep your mind open to what happened, no matter how crazy I'm about to sound. This happened. From my perspective, none of this is fictional. This was all too real to me and to X. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. The trip stopped. No come down. No falling asleep. It just stopped. The movement stopped. I felt sober. I felt like myself. I wasn't disoriented. We both looked at each other in complete confusion. What happened? We both asked that. I just went along with it and said, "Well, that was a nice trip, man. I'm gonna go to the restroom." I go upstairs and the trip was just over. Just like that. But as I went back downstairs, here begins the horror. I was sitting on the couch and he said, "I have something to show you." He plays an episode of Dragon Ball Z. It began, and it glitched out kind of. The title screen said the episode was called Mistakes of Last Night. I was utterly confused. He looked at me as if he knew something I didn't know. The episode played, and full force, I was flung back into the trip, like I've been punched with a psychedelic fist of intense power. The episode included a fight between Frieza and Goku. That night, I was being tested. Something else was with us. Something evil. Something communicating through the TV, Dragon Ball Z, and controlling X. X wasn't himself. The whole time, I felt like he was in on it. Of course, the entity couldn't cause physical harm to me, so perhaps he used a host. This guy is about 200 or 300 pounds more than me. He is a big guy. I got up to go get some water. I was nervous and very scared. He was in my way and asked where I was going. I didn't answer, and he looked like he was going to hit me, so I put up my fists, just in case, so I could defend myself. He swung at me, knocking me on my bed. He then got on top of me and started to beat the fuck out of me. He got up and apologized. I apologized as well. I decided to stay down there with him. Then came the tests. In Dragon Ball Z, Goku represented life, Frieza represented death. The clock read 4 a.m. Every time I would make a mistake, everything would replay. The episode would go backwards. Me and him would both go in reverse, and the clock would reset to 4. I know, ridiculous. Just keep hearing me out. Every time my will to live fell short, Frieza would get the upper hand on Goku, and X would freak out and continue to hurt me. I was being tested. I was being punished. I let out all of my emotions and started crying deeply. He got really emotional, and I hugged him, and he said it was okay. Everything will be okay. Some blurry things happen. I don't recall it. but I had to endure every bad feeling. The test was to endure it and prove that I had the will to survive. I threw up on his carpet, so I went to clean it up. Out of courtesy, I went to go to his laundry room inside of his basement where we were to go wash it. I get in there and he starts pounding on the door. The door slams open and he's grabbing me, pulling me back, punching me, my blood all over the wash dial for the washing machine. He threw me down and started to choke me with a pillow. I slowly slipped away, but I had to live. I had to prove to this entity that I wanted my life. In my mind, I could hear him mocking me, the entity telling me I am unworthy of my life. I was suffocated, punched relentlessly, had the air sucked out of me, had intense pressure build up inside. I was about as close to death as you can get without dying. I was screaming, "He's trying to kill me, help!" at the top of my lungs, over and over. Finally, I got up and I broke his pipe that was in there to defend myself against him. Finally, I slipped free of his grip. I walked out into the basement room, lost all of my energy, and fainted. I then began to go into a seizure, every part of my body shaking violently without control. Next thing I know, I woke up in the ambulance. They told me if they hadn't gotten there sooner, I would have died from blood loss. They estimated that I had a good 15 minutes until I could have lost my life. I was there. I was at the edge. I slipped away momentarily while being choked on the floor, reaching for something to grab, something to just help me get a breath of air. There are some details that I left out because I'm not sure when it happened on the timeline. I spilled a full cup of water on myself. The entity told me I had to go through complete embarrassment. I had to prove I could live. I got completely naked. Why? For the above reason, to learn a lesson. I cried and cried, yelling everything I regret in life. I haven't touched LSD since. I never will, ever. Thank you for reading. It was really hard typing this out. This past Friday, I came home from classes around 2:30 p.m. and found my younger, 18-year-old brother relaxing on the couch, watching Rick and Morty, and enjoying a bowl from his vaporizer. It was his spring break. I already had mine a couple weeks earlier, and he had convinced our parents to allow him to stay home while they drove to Orlando for their usual spring break vacation. I was tasked with watching over the house, dog, and cat, and making sure that my younger brother didn't get into any trouble. I was looking forward to smoking with him and possibly tripping with him without fear of being found out by our parents. We hadn't been very close until about a year ago. We mutually discovered that we both shared a penchant for smoking cannabis. Over the past year, we had bonded through smoking together, sharing music, and sharing our psychedelic experiences. We had tripped together twice before with DXM, once with MDMA, and once off of 3 tabs of 25B NBOME. The NBOME trip began nicely, but ended semi-badly as our parents found us obviously under the influence and began interrogating us concerning the drug. There were no adverse health effects. However, we were tripping quite intensely, and being interrogated is not an ideal setting for tripping. Our parents were quite upset. Despite our bad trip, we still enjoyed the psychedelic experience and looked forward to another more enjoyable one together. After arriving home from classes, I proposed the idea of tripping. He was on board and began messaging his friends for possible connections. One of his classmates, whom he had shared several classes with and casually talked to, said that he had 7 tabs of 25B NBOME that he had been saving and was willing to share. The friend, who I shall refer to as Jay from here on out, arrived, and we dosed sublingually just after 5 p.m. The tabs were actually from the same sheet that we had used for our 3-tab trip that I referred to above, Monopoly game board blotter art. Since that last trip was a little too intense, we each settled for 2 tabs each, confident that we would have a satisfying, not underwhelming, but not overwhelming trip. I had actually tried one tab from the same batch a couple months before, and while it was a nice time, it was underwhelming compared to my previous 5 NBOME experiences. Side note, this was Jay's 7th trip and probably my brother's 10th or so. He had more tripping experience than me. 30 minutes in, we had all swallowed our tabs, having experienced the usual horrible, metallic, chemical taste and numbing effect, and I felt the electric energy characteristic of NBOMEs start to stimulate my mind and body. We vaporized a bowl of cannabis and puffed on my hookah, which contained a mix of tobacco and cannabis, in the garage, hoping that it would calm the speediness and intensify our visuals. 50 minutes in, the hookah wasn't all that pleasant, and the disco-type lights we had in the garage were a little overstimulating, so we decided to step inside and listen to music in our family room. At this point, it was difficult figuring out the stereo system, and we weren't talking very much. I think that we were all being hit pretty hard by the NBOME, making communication difficult. My memory of the next few hours are quite hazy and blurred together. I remember that the visuals were very strong and beautiful. I remember Jay asking several times what we liked to do while tripping. He repeatedly tried to initiate some sort of activity, whether that was music listening or playing video games. He must have been bored, but I was quite content admiring the visuals and getting lost in my own head. I remember stepping outside into the backyard and admiring the beautiful, sunny evening. I remember attempting to play Primus's Jerry Was a Race Car Driver on Rock Band with my electronic drum kit and failing, quite pathetically, a song I've gold starred on Expert. I remember sitting in the family room and seeing my brother stumble around and fall over. Now, this is where I should have noticed something odd, but I was heavily under the influence and lost in my own thoughts. I wrote it off as him tripping hard, or perhaps being silly. I was stuck in my own head, experiencing thought loops where random people's names would repeatedly pop up, along with visualizing Newtonian physics and molecules, amongst many other odd physical effects. I recall sitting on the toilet, simply zoning out, for what seemed like quite a while. There is a vague memory of Jay and my brother coming into the bathroom with me and staring in the mirror. My brother had a bit of a crazed, confused look and coloration on his face, which in retrospect must have been a little bit of blood. Next thing I know, I'm upstairs in my own room, starting to come down. The time must have been around 9 p.m., 4 hours after dosing. I tried lying down in bed as I was quite exhausted, but then I remembered my brother and Jay. For some reason, I felt very apprehensive about going downstairs to check on them. I was feeling creepy vibes and remember having morbid, negative thoughts. However, I ventured downstairs and saw broken glass all over the kitchen floor. I was very confused and extremely worried. I saw that the front room window blinds were still open and a mess, as if someone had run their hands up and down them. I quickly fixed the blinds and tiptoed over the glass into the kitchen. What I saw next may haunt me for the rest of my life. I saw my brother lying on his back in the family room, with vomit trails down either side of his mouth. My stomach immediately dropped. Had everyone's worst nightmare become a reality? I turned him over onto his side. He wasn't breathing. His face was gray, and his lips were blue. I looked over and saw Jay lying face down about 10 feet over, probably lost in his own thoughts. I screamed my brother's name, hearing my voice as I'd never heard it before. I frantically searched around for the nearest phone and dialed 911. The lady on the phone recorded my address, said help was on the way, and instructed me to perform chest compressions. Having been certified in CPR, I placed the palms of my hand on the center of his chest and began forcefully compressing to the beat of the Bee Gees' Stayin' Alive. Deep down, I had very little hope. He looked like he had been lying there without oxygen for at least half an hour to 45 minutes. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. He began applying chest compressions, then ripped open my brother's shirt and attached the electrodes from the defibrillator. Jay, meanwhile, had risen to a seated position and still seemed to be under the influence. He didn't say anything and displayed no sense of urgency. Feeling helpless, I watched in horror as the paramedic continued chest compressions. He uttered under his breath, "Shit, he's bleeding," as blood began to seep out of my brother's mouth. I could not believe what I was seeing. Eventually, about 25 cops, firefighters, and paramedics had poured into the house while a team of people continued to attempt to resuscitate my brother. Not being cooperative, Jay was placed in cuffs and held down by a police officer. Jay still wouldn't speak except for a few high-pitched shrieks while resisting the officer's restraint. Officer sat me down out of view from my brother and began asking me all sorts of questions. I informed them of what we had taken, not wanting to withhold information that could save my brother. After an excruciating, anxiety-ridden 20 minutes, my brother was carted off on a stretcher into an ambulance. The other personnel had done the same thing with Jay. Utterly shocked at the events that had just transpired and fearing the worst, I was escorted into an ambulance of my own. Upon arriving at the hospital, I received the news that I had most feared. They had failed to bring my brother back. All I could do was sit down in shock. What was supposed to be a fun bonding experience with my brother had turned into our last moments together. I feel such horrible guilt and responsibility for my brother's death. I knew the dangers of NBOME with its higher potential for overdose and problems with vasoconstriction. I falsely assumed that we would be safe since my brother and I had taken 3 tabs from the same batch before with no adverse health effects. We had even stepped down the dosage from last time. My greatest worry was a psychological crisis or someone leaving the house, not death. I did not know of all the seizures and heart issues that others have experienced with the NBOME series. I believed that my brother had a seizure and choked on his own vomit. However, the coroner stated that he had experienced an arrhythmia, which led to cardiac arrest and thus death. At the very least, I wish I could have known what had happened in those last moments. I wish I could have been there, lucid and ready to call for help. The house downstairs looked as if Motley Crue had destroyed the place in a drug-fueled frenzy. I imagined my brother was losing consciousness, stumbling and falling, trying to make sense of what was going on. He had minor lacerations, cuts, and abrasions from the glass, and contusions on his head, arms, and legs. I hope with all of my heart that he was not suffering in his last moments. I like to think that he was having the trip of a lifetime. Perhaps he talked to God. Maybe he saw the light. I have no idea if there is an afterlife, as I am not religious, and neither was my brother. But if there is, I hope he's in a peaceful place. He was the most kind-hearted, loving, carefree individual I have ever had the pleasure of knowing. I want this to be a cautionary tale for all of you out there. I am not writing off all psychedelics, but know that the NBOME series does not have nearly the same safety profile as other psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin. If you do choose to do this drug, expect the unexpected and prepare for the worst. Please have a trip sitter there for you. If any drug was to be taken that evening, I should have been sober and trip sitting. I would not wish this experience on my worst enemy. My 4 sisters lost a brother, and my parents wept over their son's cold, lifeless body. Please be careful. Hello everyone, my name is Jay, and here's a little backstory on myself before I begin. I have had a pretty bad life. When I was born, my mom was on meth the entire pregnancy. When I was 3 weeks to 3 months old, she got rid of me for meth. She gave me to her aunt and uncle, who are my true parents because they raised me. Unfortunately, it was too good to be true because my new mom developed mental issues and she started becoming very violent, and by about 5 or 6, she finally started abusing me. And at this point, she had already been abusing my dad. Because of the growing issues, me and my dad left, and after a year, I was 14 and in a fresh new start. So I did what anyone who was depressed and beaten to a black and blue pulp did. I tried marijuana. After marijuana, I then tried Xanax, then cocaine, then meth and bath salts, all the way up and down the list. But weed was the only psychedelic I had tried at that point, except one time I made DMT, but I sold that for money. I also fell in love, and she was truly my first love. I had girlfriends before, but she was just so goddamn beautiful and smart. She truly was my everything, but I made the mistake of loving before I loved myself. I took too many drugs, I cut myself, and in dissociated states, I couldn't remember. I would say some awful things like, "I don't understand why you can't love me the same. It makes me want to kill myself most of the time." I regret most of those words now, and I would apologize, but I don't want to start problems or hurt her mentally. She's been doing very good since her and I were together, and we seem to fix each other while growing apart, and honestly, I couldn't be happier now. Back then though, I was so depressed, I finally tried heroin, and I'd smoked it for months, until I finally tried LSD. It's 6 p.m. in February, I had just gotten out of the shower, and I'm debating if I want to try my first blotter tab of acid. My roommates are B, E, M, P, and AP. P and AP and E and M are a couple, and A is my cousin. B is my best friend, and he was there for every other drug experience I'd had since that point. E was my other best friend, and him and I were the ones always sourcing new drugs for our group. Also, I was coming down off of heroin and cocaine at the same time when I tried LSD. The beginning of the trip. I walked into the living room of my trap house with a few things. There's 1 tab of LSD, 1 2-milligram bar of Xanax. Quick PSA about benzodiazepines. They can kill almost any trip, and trip killers can save your mental health if you're having a bad trip, and safety is number 1. Fun is always number 2. Remember that. With the tab of LSD and 2-milligram bar of Xanax, there was also a quarter of marijuana and my phone. B said, "Hey, you're out of the shower. You gonna try acid?" I had a very childlike experience. It was great. I said, "Yeah, give me a sec to set up." I then found E and M and asked them to trip sit me, and if E could roll me a 3.5 gram joint for when I start tripping. Big mistake, and you'll see why soon. I popped the tab while in their room, and we decided to set up Xbox with Total Drama Island on for E and M in the kitchen, and B put anime on in the living room. I started to trip, and at first, it was just small and cool, so I get up and start moving around to see how things change as I move, and I end up walking outside for a few minutes to watch the stars. I sat on the porch and watched my first true visual. The stars proceeded to start beaming light between one another. Me in my state perceived it as the aliens were doing that, so I walked back in happy at the discovery as it seemed like a valuable lesson. I find E and M after running past 3 or 4 times, and E asked me, "They're going to distort the world, and everything will know true suffering, even hellfire won't burn nearly this hot." I looked over to him and asked if he could repeat that, and he said, "Yeah, are you feeling it yet?" I looked at the wall and said, "Yeah, I'm definitely feeling something." The wall then started getting little black dots in a line and spiraling up the wall, and black liquid goo leaking down the crack. I decided to get up and move back to the living room with B, and watching everything start to bend and sound distort even more. I yelled into the kitchen, "Hey E, can you bring that joint in here? I want to see what weed feels like, since it's also a very mild psychedelic." He said, "Alright, let me finish rolling my blunt for when I go to bed, and I'll be right there." A few minutes later, he walked into the living room and sparked my joint. We smoked it, and I could definitely feel the difference. The joint made the LSD hit extremely hard and intensely. I decided to get up and hide in my room for what felt like years. When I walked out of my pitch black room that looked like a junkie had lived there, M asked, "Hey, you alright? You look a little distressed. My first acid trip was also a little scary. I can help." I said to her, "Yeah, I'm alright. This demon's cut is very different." But I only remember saying, "Yeah, I'm alright." I then walked into the bathroom and started truly freaking out then. I was just a few months into the breakup with A, and I was finally confronting my true feeling, just in a much different way. I had been watching the bathroom flash into different realities, kinda like I was floating in space and distorting the flow of time, watching nebulae instead of planets. But it was as if the nebula was made of earth and rock, light flowing from and all around it, as if they were rivers. I then turned around and finally faced the mirror. That voice that came from E when he asked me if I was alright came back. She asked me with her voice echoing around the room, "You know what this is, right? All the pain and torture you caused me. You were the one that loved pain. It's my turn to teach you a lesson, using it as you did me so many times." A then walked into view of the mirror from behind me, as if she was using my body to shield my view from her. I gazed into the mirror as the nebulae turned into viscera, blood, and gore. The streams of light flowed with darkness, sucking the light from the area and space it was around. It was then I cried for the first time in months, the hot tears slowly flowing down my cheeks. They flowed, leaving a black viscous stream. A reached out and touched me, one of her finger turning black, and the tar of evil reached very faintly to infect her non-existent finger. "That's the evil that flows within your veins. Jay, you have both good and evil within, but at this rate, the evil and toxicity of yourself is going to spread. If you keep on this righteous path of self-destruction, you won't just destroy yourself, you're going to infect everyone you know. From there, it spreads over and over and over. Do you really want to be the downfall of not only yourself, but your friends, family, and all loved ones you hold dear to your life?" I said, "No, I don't. This world is hell, and I don't know if I'm the devil or a useless demon to do his pawning, but regardless, we are stuck here. Death is the only escape, and in reality, it's you signing your soul to me, the evil that comes in darkness, the light fading, and the darkness envelops us all when we die to isolate us, just like before any of us were born." She just looked at me. The tears she was holding back flowed like the ocean or a sea of black tears, the black emptiness completely overtaking the walls. What light was there I no longer saw. The nebulae was drowned out, the very faint distorted sound from the TV disappeared, and all that was left was her, good me, evil me, and the me that perceived all of this. Good me was to the left, and it didn't look like me, but I could feel the life force of that embryonic-looking version of myself. He represented the purity and innocence. The evil me, with skin blacker than charcoal, with two distinct black horns, two humongous blood-red eyes, and a red glow from behind. A was across from me, holding out a razor blade. I asked her, "So this is where I make the choice of what I am?" She smirked and replied with a simple, "No, me." "So then what is all of this?" "This is your time to finally truly understand yourself and the constant changing of the world itself. Sure, you have an influence, but there's so much you haven't learned, like true happiness, true friendship, or even true love." With a swift motion, she ripped off the very shirt I'd met her in years prior and proceeded to slice open my chest and pull out my heart still beating, blood still leaking from the veins that kept it connected to me. She cut some rune into it and then said, "This is a symbol of an observer and warrior of love. I am willing to give you a new path to follow, but you're going to have to embrace your evil and good, balance the two. If you balance the two, you will find your new path awaiting." I asked, "How will I know what to do though? I don't even know where to start." "You will know when the time comes." All at once, I fell millions of miles and crashed back into my body, facing myself in the mirror, pulling one eyelid down with a finger and looking very intensely at my huge pupil. I was freaked out by the experience I just had and decided to very skittishly creep back into the kitchen with E&M. They both looked at me, paused, then looked at each other, and then back to me, and at the same time said, "Are you having a bad trip?" I looked up and said, "It's as simple as pie." It was not simple at all, though. I felt like my heart was on the verge of exploding. My brain also felt the same way, and I felt very, very wrong. I persevered for a couple hours in that bathroom and was coming up on hour 5 by the time they asked if my trip was bad. They resumed Total Drama Island, and I had no idea how much time had passed at the moment, but I was thinking I'm coming down finally. It's easing up. Then the TV was playing Owen in the dodgeball episode, and all I heard was complete gibberish, something like this if I had to write it out. with perfume if Big John such magic feet, and then gave a very evil look with angry bloodthirsty eyes and evil body language. From seeing that, I started laughing very, very hard to the point where pain wasn't the problem. The problem was, I felt extremely sick and started dry heaving along with very extreme anxiety, and then it just stopped after what felt like 30 minutes. I then just started staring at the wall. Again, the black dots showed up, but the black gooey rivers had disappeared from the grain of the wood. Those damn dots started flowing in circles like plastic bottles of air on a winding river until they started spinning in circles that just kept spiraling inwards of itself. It eventually overtook me and everything started spinning very, very fast, and I started crying again while I just kept saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Stuck in the thought, just constantly looking for God knows how long. But once the spinning stopped, the dots flowed into single words at a time. I want it, E. And me tripping very hard, feeling very dizzy and sick, read them aloud. And E was my trip sitter who had given the 2 milligram Xanax previously. I also told him if I say at any point I wanted the Xanax, to get it in my system no matter what, even if he had to hurt me physically. I didn't fight it though. I didn't have to. I had no strength, nor the mental capacity to even know what was happening. He put the pill in my mouth, and from habit of letting all my friends feed me pills when I wanted them, I chewed up the awful bitter pill and swallowed. I then collapsed on the table and fell asleep for 5 minutes. When I awoke, I was still mildly tripping, but I was back, and I could remember all the main details of my trip ever since. Because of LSD, I am now sober. I am almost a year off of heroin, and I only smoke weed and take the occasional mushroom, acid, or maybe DMT trip. People say drugs can ruin lives. I'm here to tell you, they can do both. LSD has saved my life, and I haven't regretted anything since I took it, but in the moment of tripping, that one faithful time was long enough in hell to set this demon straight. I once ingested 16 grams of shrooms 4 years ago or so, and what I saw was so bizarre. For context, at the time, I was going through a rough patch. My older sister had died of cancer less than a year ago, my wife had committed suicide 3 weeks prior, and our children had been taken away by CPS, or CFS, depending where you're from. So I was completely alone, and in a very rough patch. One element to remember is the words, "Show me the real world," a sentence that was said to me by the man who sold me the shrooms. So I took the bag of shrooms and went back to my apartment, which was in the basement of a mansion. I sit on the couch and decide to start munching on these. I think to myself after ingesting half the bag, 30 minutes in, I don't feel anything, so I take the rest and finish it off. Less than an hour later, the world started melting before my eyes. For the longest time, at the very start, it was an immediate sense of relief and happiness, a type of joy that was so pure and energetic. It was as if my mind shut off all the extra weight in it, and I felt lighter than ever. I couldn't control my laughter. The characters from the TV seemed to be jumping out and making weird faces, talking funny, but I could still understand English and what they were saying. The lights seemed to become wavy and sort of dance with the shadows. There was a lot of geometry around me, especially on the ground. My fingers and my limbs seemed distorted to me. That's as far as I remember of that, so I smoked weed at first when the effects weren't as strong. Then, after enjoying the sights, it seemed at moments that small figures were darting around. I could hear sounds or voices. It was jumbled. I thought back, somehow, to the man who sold me the shrooms and uttered the words I wish I hadn't. "Show me the world for what it truly is. I want to see the real world." That was the start of the rabbit hole, the descent or rise, whatever you want to call it. It was as if a curtain dropped before my eyes. Literally, imagine someone grabbing the 2 lower corners of a curtain or tablecloth and pulling it off really fast. A few hours later, I came back to it. I blacked out for some time, woke up in my bed, phone in one hand, speaking frantically to my friend in another city. I was telling her I was going to die, panicking, and genuinely being frightened. Then I got stuck in a loop as I talked to her. I'd put the phone down, lie down, got up, look at the open door, sit down, put the phone down, lie down, and then get up again. She seemed more like a holograph than a video. I could see all her features, like she was embossed on the screen, moving and really bright instead of inside the device. Then I had my first ever encounter with the beast and my wife. Remember that my wife had passed just 3 weeks prior. Imagine the most potent, dominating voice vibrating within your head. That shape, that black mass, reached the ceiling in height and was so wide, but it floated. It didn't speak with words, but right into the mind. It showed me my wife, who stood by silently and glared at me intensely, repeating over and over that it was going to kill me and bring me in like it did with her. It threatened my family, said I would never see the kids again. Everything very negative. It honestly felt like it was wrestling me to get a hold of my mind and spirit. I freaked out, and at this point, I don't know if I dropped the phone or what, but the phone was gone. Who knows where? Meanwhile, I'm still trapped in a loop, just shorter. I keep sitting up and lying down on the bed. I speak into my mind and say I'll call the police, the ambulance, something, because I think I'm genuinely dying at this point, or I'm just about to. This creature speaks into my mind and tells me that if I do that, it will possess my body and murder anyone who tries to come in, and I completely freak out. Then my loop broke, and I just sat up, speaking into my mind with this thing. I don't know how long I sat up at the edge of my bed, still staring at this beast and just communicating with it. I don't know if it was the phone, the TV, or what, but it wasn't only its voice. There seemed to be a mixture of voices, both male and female. They came together, but it didn't make any sense at all to me. Its voice only came through, clearer and more potent than the rest. Another blackout, and when I came to it, I was back on the couch where I'd started off at first, staring at what would have been the TV. Instead, it was a big pile of moving colors that just went in and out of the screen. I tried to speak, but it was like someone grabbed my words out of my mouth and tore them apart. That's the best way I can describe any of it. It was like my voice was breaking into segments in the air around me, and I could hear each piece break apart and get distorted. The same happened to the words from the TV. I am a man who can speak 5 languages in my day-to-day life, but I could not understand a single one of them at that moment. They overlapped, blended, broke, and stretched. Nothing could be understood. After that point, I remember seeing strange little creatures again going on from the living room into the other bedroom. In a line, they glowed blue for some reason, but were no higher than maybe 8 inches at the very most. I never turned on the light in the room. It felt like the night had a light of its own and stared at the corner where they went in for who knows how long. For some time, I sat there in the dark, empty room with the window open, watching the shadows dance and drip. I don't remember what came next. I just know I woke up in my bed the next day. I had taken the shrooms at 8 p.m. the night before, and it was around 1 to 2 when I woke up. This was one of the craziest, most intense trips I've ever experienced. I am a friend of the person who was in this particular experience. He has told me exactly what to write, and I will write from his first-person perspective. This story takes place in Atlanta, and I am 18 years old. I had done LSD several times before this occurrence. Each time had been the most pleasing of experiences. I had ventured through my thoughts, and each time came out happily, seemingly on top of the world. Little did I know, my next trip would not be so beautiful. It was a Friday night. That week at school, I had done poorly on a couple of tests, and when my parents found out, they gave me hell. They called me stupid and threatened to send me to military school. You know, all that bullshit. I had also been having problems with my girlfriend. She found out that I had been doing drugs. I had not informed her, as she was not particularly fond of them. I tried to reason with her, but she would not have it. Our relationship continued to deteriorate. until finally we broke up on the Thursday prior. Well, back to Friday night, I obviously had not been feeling too happy, so I decided to meet up with a few friends as a sort of pick-me-up. I met 3 of my friends at the movie theater, and one of them told me they had scored some LSD. One of the main rules of tripping is to always think good thoughts and be happy prior to your trip. This was where I made my mistake. I was incredibly depressed, but I decided to just fuck it and down 9 gel tabs. My friends also had some, and I'm not sure how much. We decided to go out to my friend's car before the movie and smoke a few bowls. I had 4. We then proceeded to see The Ring. Huge fucking mistake. God damn, I was a dumbass for seeing that movie while tripping. Everything started out normal before the movie started. I was watching previews, and the colors on the screen swirled and twisted in shape. They were so beautiful. I was sure this was going to be a pleasant trip. I would be brought out of my depression. Haha. Wow, was I fucking wrong. So the movie started, and immediately I am transported to a world of fear and horror. If you have seen The Ring, then you know the part where you see the girl in the closet and her horribly contorted face. When I saw that, my friends and I completely lost it. We sprinted out of the theater screaming. I'm pretty sure I was crying. I'd never seen anything scarier in my life. But because I was tripping, I kept seeing the image over and over again, as if the girl was right next to me. We luckily spotted another one of our friends. He was sober that night. We told him what was going on, and he was nice enough to drive us to our friend's house, as we were obviously incapable. I looked out the window, and I saw shadows instantly twist shape and turn into perverse face demons. One shadow looked like fingers, and it turned into an arm that reached out and attempted to grab me and pull me down to hell. This arm had a voice, a deep, mysterious, terrifying voice, almost like the one of Indrid Cold from the Mothman prophecies. I pissed my pants because I was so scared. We finally arrived home. I felt as if this feeling would never go away as we walked into my friend's basement. It was extremely dark down there, and in the corner of my eye, I kept seeing a terrifying, demented, evil face staring its deranged, menacing eyes into mine. My friends had kind of cooled down, but not me. We decided to smoke some more bowls to lift our moods. When it was my turn, I lit the Zippo and I saw the flame, twisting and twirling right in front of me. I was perplexed by it. I had never seen anything more interesting in my life. But out of nowhere, all of a sudden, the flame just exploded in my eyes and was the length of the room. I then saw dark figures crawling out of the flame, obviously coming to take me away. I sat there, quivering in fear. My hands were shaking so hard that I dropped the Zippo and it fell on my leg. I sat there and saw it burning a hole through my pants and burning my leg, but I could not feel it. Luckily, my friend noticed what was going on and knocked the Zippo off of my leg, and my other friend picked it up and started to stare at it in a pleasurable wonder. I wished I could have felt that way. I started to cry, just all out cry. Why were my friends so much better off than me? Why the fuck does God hate me? I then started to scream, just screaming my lungs out. My friend came over and pulled his hand back and slapped me vigorously across the face. I watched the motion of his hand, and it seemed like 50 hands were coming across and slapping me, one by one. I had to retaliate. I took the lamp off the table next to me and threw it at his head. The glass lamp shattered across his face, and he slumped to the floor. The light had singed his hair, and his face was dripping with blood. It made me happy to see him in pain, to see somebody else going through the same thing I was. My 2 other friends weren't even watching as I got on top of my nearly unconscious friend and started beating him senseless with anything I could find. Thankfully, his parents sprinted down the basement stairs and saw what happened. They stopped me from potentially and unknowingly killing my friend. My 2 other friends had no idea what was going on because they were over in the other corners of the dark room tripping hard. The boys' parents flicked on the lights, and I was blinded by it. I jumped off the buoy and started to sprint out the door, where I jumped through a window thinking I was a hawk. Of course, we were in the basement, so I luckily just landed on the ground in front of me. The boy's parents called 911. All of us were taken to the hospital. We had mostly come down from the trip by now. My friend was lying unconscious, barely alive. I had just now realized what I had done. I just had a broken left arm and some deep cuts from jumping through the window, but nothing like my friend's wounds. The rest of us were taken to the police station for questioning. I admitted to ingesting the LSD, but not to beating my friend. My friends admitted to nothing and wound up getting out scot-free. Fuckers. But I was charged with assault and battering, and I had some gel tabs in my pocket, so they charged me with drug possession too. I have been charged as an adult, so I'm currently in jail. I'm going to court soon, where they will ultimately find me out. They already told me they know I'm guilty. I have no case. I am fucked. Royally fucked. I am still suffering from psychological trauma. LSD has taken my life down the tubes, but it's really my own fault. I hope, somehow, I get the death sentence, because death would be way better than this lifestyle. The moral of the story is, don't fuck up. Don't trip when you are depressed, and always trip with somebody sober. I didn't listen to the advice I read on the internet, and now look at me. Please, give me your prayers. This was the absolute most terrifying experience of my life. Life. What a word. So simple, so fragile. One chance to make the world and people around me a paradise full of joy and love, or screw up and be forced into a mind-shattering death wheel of excruciating pain and agony. Recalling this experience is difficult enough without even having to type it, going through every heart-pounding detail. This will be quite long and detailed, but it is worth the read. Not every detail can be accurately recounted, as this was more than 2 years ago, but it will be very close. A date that will forever be burned into my memory. Me and the boys ended up at a bash on this particular night. Not much of a bash though, about 30 bodies. All the normal bash stuff on the go and whatnot. So a few of my buddies go out to purchase some fine Mary Jane when I discover I have forgotten my wallet. Big problem there. No money, no weed, no beers, and no trip. Until someone suggests that I go to a local drugstore and get some free caffeine pills. Take a couple packs, they would be a good trip, he says. I had taken a few before and liked the benefits from them, so I decided a few more couldn't hurt. Me thinking it's just caffeine after all, and maybe it'll give me a fun trip. Welcome to hell, is what he should have said. The pills were easily gotten, and soon I returned to the party to pop them. The time was 10 p.m. 24 in all, that's 4,800 milligrams. I have read online that 4,500 milligrams has been described as the lethal dose. Over the course of 5 minutes, all 24 were within me, just waiting to release their hell upon me. At 11 p.m., me and a few boys leave the party, and by this time, I was on a decent trip, if I could call it that. I felt as if I could run forever, so I did. I ran for a good 20 minutes, just because I had that much energy. It was incredible how hyper I was. My speech was sped up significantly, as well as everything else I did. It was as if my mind worked 5 times faster than it normally would. Stuff just didn't seem right. I came back to find my friends and they were just about to go into Subway. This is where the gates of hell slowly creak open. We go in and I sit down as my friends buy some food. One of them comes to sit next to me and asks why I was making my right knee jerk up and down. I told him I wasn't trying to do that and had control, but not much over the movement. I forced this movement to stop, for a short while, but then it started again. I decided that we should leave. We meet with more people at this point who had been kicked out of the party and walk to an abandoned train tracks to jump over a cliff into trees for fun. It is fun, also very stupid, but fun nonetheless. Stuff is starting to get really fucked up now. Everything is going so fast, it was overwhelming. I put my right hand into my right pocket and it started to shake slowly at first, but then violently. I had very little control and could not make it stop. Right then, I knew I was fucked up bad, so I just left and went home. I think that's the only time I ever ran all the way home from there. I got home. Home is where comfort is supposed to be. There was none to be found here. Relatives were over when I arrived around 12 a.m. I had to force myself considerably to make it look as if something wasn't wrong with me. I spoke to my uncle for about 3 minutes and got by that fairly well, or so it seemed to me anyway. By the time 12:40 a.m. came, the gates of hell were wide open. My relatives were long gone, everyone else asleep. Not me though. I wouldn't sleep for a long time. My temperature was through the roof. My heart was pounding insanely, non-stop. I honestly thought I would have a heart attack. Barfing had begun. I drank water, I ate a little, then it all came back up. I wanted to go outside and run. This didn't help. It was colder outside, but that didn't really help either. I would run back and forth between my computer room and my bedroom, both luckily downstairs, so many times I can't remember. I was frantic, trying very hard to calm myself, but at this point, this seemed like an impossibility. This was bad. Very, very bad. How I felt was just so wrong, but not the sort of wrongness or dissociation from your normal mind, like say a DXM or an LSD trip will induce. I mean wrong. I felt very sick and just not right, like my body was shouting as loud as it could, yelling, "You're a fucking idiot. This isn't right. You're gonna die." It was like this and much worse for a horrifyingly long while. I talked to a couple of my friends who were now home on ICQ. They said call poison control right away. I said no, I'm not getting in trouble for this. I'll just sit it through the night. Then the dry heaves began. Dry heaves are not fun. Anyone who has experienced true dry heaves can tell you this with a sharp look in their eyes. Bad was all around. Black spots of fuzz clouded my vision at certain times, just wrong everywhere. Eventually, because of my friends on ICQ, some called to see just how fucked up I was. They kept calling, and I think the third time they called my parents. They had the phone off the hook too because they suck a lot. "I took a lot of pills tonight," I said, and I heard a phone click down. They bitched, they yelled, they looked on in disgust, a little sympathy, not much, and tears. They got ready to take me to the hospital. Even though this sucks so much, what my friends really did was save my life. I was fucked by this point. I mean, really fucked. Beyond fucked. So fucked, it terrified me. This is now around 1:30 a.m. I honestly thought I was going to die now. I was just too fucked up. Here's the sickest part to this tale. My parents actually took their sweet time getting dressed and driving me to the hospital. The entire time, I was dry heaving with my head in a shopping bag, beyond fucked up. And here was my dad driving maybe 40 kilometers per hour down a road where the speed limit is 80, just for the hell of it. To make me learn my lesson, I guessed. Fucking bastard. I get to the emergency room, more waiting, about 20 minutes goes by. I talked to a nurse, told her my dose and what I took and stuff like that, and she said go wait. I could have nearly cried. I was just too fucked up now. Far too fucked to even want to be alive, but I kept going until this nightmare was to end in any way. At about 2:30 a.m., I get put into a room. I have to stand up and give a piss test in the bathroom, then back to this room. They found some weed, so a week later, I got bitched at for that. I am given a bedpan to barf in. This bedpan was changed at least 25 times over the course of me being in the hospital. I lay down on a table bed thing in this room barfing in agony. This trip is in no way fun at all. Not one stain of this experience was enjoyable. It was all hell. I remember looking at a sad expression on my mother's face as she watched me barf into the pan and make a lot of jerking motions with my whole body until I am seen by a doctor. That was probably in the top 3 worst 20 minutes I've ever had. I was told it was too late for a stomach pump, so they had to act fast. He quickly got me a wheelchair and IV, then escorted me to the real emergency room where a few other sick people are. I somehow got out of my clothes and into the sheet covering thing and onto a bed. I am immediately taken a blood sample, then people start injecting lots of drugs into my IV tube. A heart rate monitor with 3 suction electrode things are attached to specific points on my chest. That's a frightening sound. It was just going too fast and didn't seem normal, because it wasn't. And then I just lay there, barfing, listening, going in and out between periods of black and sight, warmer than I've ever been and in great pain. My gut hurt a lot. What might have been 2 hours of pure hell, nothing can describe what I felt during this time. I was in the hospital for 3 nights, including the first one. I slid in and out of consciousness the first night, terrible agony, barfing all over myself, uncontrollable movements, glimpses of a few people, vague words, and then blackness. Not sleep, blackness. It was as if I were still awake and dreaming at the same time. Time seemed to pass normally, but it was all just black, black everywhere. I was so scared. I am not one to be scared of most anything, but I will admit, I was terrified. The next 2 nights and days had me recovering. More drugs, more people, more terrible, terrible memories. I was seen by a psychiatrist. She told me I had to be suicidal to do what I had done, so I complained, but I was basically near ignored. I had to see her again every 3 weeks for 3 months. I was told over these 2 days just how close I had come to death. So close, so very close. It gives me the shivers. I was also told how extremely lucky I was that I got into the hospital and not stayed home all night. Doctors said that there was a 90% chance that I would have died. I nearly died there on the spot. I lost all trust and respect for my parents, for most of my relatives, from other people. And to this day, they still have this story brought up when I am discussed by people. I still carry the mental scars of this experience, but I survived. I was restricted from low amounts of caffeine for 4 months, just for safety. I experienced several extremely painful chest pains after this, which never occurred before this incident. But I am alive. Since this experience, I have come very close to completely recovering, but not all the way. I have grown and matured. I refer to this experience as the Remembrance Day weekend for remembering hell. For the last 2 November 9ths, I have celebrated my life, and that it is still on the go and will continue to do so. Life is no joke. When it's gone, it's gone. I've had 4 experiences with 5-MeO-DMT. 2 of the first 3 resulted in a bliss I had previously thought unattainable. They were also accompanied by the most incredible sensation of mind expansion and ego loss. The insights I gained were so staggering that upon return to baseline, my mind was left with only the memory of omniscient knowledge, but not the knowledge itself. Almost as though my human brain was a container insufficient for the knowledge I had been exposed to briefly. What I wanted to share was my 4th experience. I'll be the first to admit that my use of this and other potent psychedelics had become reckless in the past year or so. I had returned from a 4-day outdoor psytrance festival where I had existed in a psychedelic haze of LSD, 2CB, 25C-NBOME, mushrooms, DMT, DPT, ketamine, and MDMA. At the time of dosing, I had less than 8 hours of sleep over the previous 96-hour period. My girlfriend came over to visit the night I returned from the festival, and we had done 2 hits of MDMA and a few bumps of ketamine. I had wanted to share the 5-MeO DMT experience with her for a while. It was about 3 a.m. when I weighed out a 10mg dose for her and a 16mg dose for myself. She snorted her line first. I then snorted mine and followed her to the bedroom where we lied down to wait for it to kick in. She began to writhe in ecstasy, and I began to feel an intense full-body orgasm. We began to hold and caress one another. Somehow, our clothes ended up coming off. Along the way, I spun off into the most intense state of ecstasy that I have ever experienced. There are no words that describe what I experienced, other than to say it was an awakening of my true self, the realization of the underlying unity of all that exists. I became eternity, except that I was no longer me. The next thing I know, my girlfriend is telling me to breathe, to come back, forcing me out of bed, to stand, telling me I need to get some fresh air. Afterwards, she told me that I had a seizure, and that my muscles had seized up completely. I had turned completely white and had stopped breathing. She had to put her fingers down my throat to open my esophagus and then gave me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. She said that I was telling her that I loved her, saying, "I love you, I love you, I love you," over and over again. It was as though I was caught in a loop, and that I began to recede as I was saying it until finally I had disappeared, and then the seizure began. Yet I was not unconscious. My consciousness throughout this experience was seamless. I was simply no longer my body. I had died. I was somehow aware that I had died, but having experienced the other side, it simply did not matter. Death was bliss, unimaginable, and beyond words. She got me out of bed, saying I needed to move around, get some air. We made it to the kitchen downstairs, and I was explaining how irrelevant life was, how earlier I had been feeling sad to see my pet dog getting older, closer to death. But with my newfound insight, I explained how ridiculous it was to feel sad about death, that death was the gateway to nirvana, and how we should rejoice in death, and that I no longer feared it, and that all that was love, an infinite, never-ending, all-encompassing love. I wanted to take her with me too. We were one. I began to tell her that I loved her. She later told me that I had begun to fade away again. She was telling me to breathe. "Don't stop breathing! Don't you dare fucking die on me!" She took me outside to get some air, but on the dock, I had another seizure. From my perspective, I was spinning off into eternity again. She is screaming, "Don't you dare! Don't you fucking die on me!" She is slapping me in the face, scratching me, anything she can do to keep me in my body. She is bringing me inside the house again, and she is mad, so mad, telling me, "Reality sets in, never again," over and over. She is so angry with me, I begin to believe that she is going to leave me. The whole sugarcoating on this trip has fallen off. The karma of this beautiful experience I just had is the nightmare of her walking out on me. She is taking me upstairs again to lie down, and at the top of the stairs, I have another seizure. She is slapping me in the face, screaming hysterically, scratching, screaming. My beautiful trip has turned into the worst nightmare ever. All of a sudden, it's like my denial is torn away, and I see myself in a very ugly light. What a fool I had been to live the life I was living, and now I am to pay the price. I am locked into a loop for the rest of eternity as the price to pay. I will suffer the nightmare of her resuscitating me for the rest of time. It's no longer beautiful. I am lost in purgatory, and there is no exit. My biggest regret is what I have done to my daughter, that she will have to live with the stigma of having a father who died of a drug overdose. I am not afraid to be dead, but dear God, not like this. Not dead of a drug overdose. Somehow, she has brought me to the front door, and we are about to go out on the porch for some air when she says there is a car in the parking lot. It's the police. We are both completely naked. We go back inside the house and close the door, running upstairs, trying to find clothes to put on, but we're both so messed up that it is impossible. I see my life flash before my eyes as I realize that this is the end. Everyone will find out. My family will know. The neighbors will know. The world will know. My life is over. Somehow, I get a pair of jeans on. She is wrapped in a bedsheet and follows me downstairs. There are drugs, scales, baggies, vials, all over the place. What a mess. With resignation, I open the door to face the police. At this point, I did not realize that my girlfriend had been screaming, as I had been out of body at the time she had been previously. So when the police officers said they were responding to a complaint from a neighbor about screaming, I assumed that the screaming must have been from me while I was out of my body. The police want to come in because the bugs are so bad outside, and I think they were suspicious. Inside, my mind is racing, and I cook up a story about having gone off my meds and that I must have just had a psychotic episode, none of which I can remember. My girlfriend picks up on this, and we tag team bullshit our way through this. They are asking for details about my condition, but I'm being very vague, and my girlfriend is telling the cops that I need an ambulance, so they call one. I asked the cop what the complaint was, and he said that a neighbor had reported a domestic dispute. Boy, did I feel relieved. I thought it was plain as day what had happened, but not to them apparently. They did notice a bag of weed on my coffee table and told me they had to flush it down the toilet. It is now 5 a.m. This episode took place over a 2-hour period. Walking back from the hospital, we pieced together what happened. I walk away from this experience with one immeasurable gift. I now know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I am eternity. There is no question of it in my mind. I have had the proverbial spiritual awakening. I have been walking around in a state of bliss for days now, weeping tears of joy and gratitude. I see the beauty in everything. It is clear to me that I am not dead because the universe has plans for me. I will fix myself and become an example of how to fight addiction. I will teach people how to attain the state of bliss that I experience without the use of drugs. I will polish myself so bright that I will become a light that you can see all over the world. We are getting married, going to Narcotics Anonymous. The world is our oyster, the future is ours, and we are one for all eternity. May you be so fortunate as to experience the light. God bless.